stepdaughter who hated me all my life even after I provided for her more than her own bio dad did suddenly wants me to adopt her. BC things didn't turn out as expected when she supported her mom's affair with another man who she thought would be a better father figure. BC now she's struggling and is accusing me of giving up on her. BC I refuse. I, Adam, 42, male, married my wife Sarah when her daughter Emma, 22 female, was just 5 years old. She's an adult now, so I've been in her life for pretty much her entire childhood and young adulthood. Her biological father, let's call him Dave, was always kind of in the picture, but it was inconsistent at best. He'd swoop in with the occasional birthday gift or make big promises he'd failed to keep, and honestly I was the one picking up the pieces when he let her down. From the moment I married Sarah, I did everything I could to be a stable father figure for Emma. I paid for her school fees, bought her first bike, took her to the doctor and all the typical dad stuff. And in a lot of ways, I tried to give her the emotional support that Dave either couldn't or wouldn't. I wanted her to know that even if her biological dad wasn't fully present, she could always rely on me. I'm not perfect, but I thought that at the very least, I was dependable. Now don't get me wrong, I never tried to replace Dave in Emma's life. I respected the fact that he was her biological father and that maybe one day he'd come around to being more involved. But as time went on, it became clear that he wasn't going to change, and I tried to just accept it for Emma's sake. It was honestly a little heartbreaking because Emma was always a bit more distant from me. She seemed to carry some kind of resentment, like maybe she thought I was the reason her parents weren't together even though they divorced before I even came into the picture. But I kept my head down and focused on being there for her. She didn't have to love me or even like me. All I wanted was to make sure she felt supported and knew I was there. We had our good moments, holidays, birthdays, family outings, and sometimes I thought we were making real progress. She'd let her guard down and even call me dad here and there. I'd always try not to make a big deal about it, but those moments meant the world to me. Looking back, I can see I was maybe too naive. I really thought that all those years of showing up would count for something eventually. As Emma got older though, things between us changed. It was like she'd flipped a switch from seeing me as just mom's husband to something a lot more negative. Suddenly I was the stepdad in every sense of the word, and not in a good way. Around her early teens, maybe 13 or 14, she started to get openly hostile. And I'm talking about her major attitude here. I'd ask her how her day was and she'd roll her eyes or give me one-word answers. If I tried to give her advice on anything, school, friends, life in general, it was like I'd committed a major offense. Her go-to phrase was, "You're not my real dad, so why do you care?" I'd be lying if I said that didn't sting. I was investing so much of my energy and time into this kid, treating her as if she was my own daughter, and she just threw it back in my face. For a while, I figured it was just teenage rebellion or the usual angst that comes with growing up, so I tried not to take it personally. But as the years went on, it became clear that it wasn't just a phase. It was deeper, more personal. The real gut punch happened around her 16th birthday. She told me straight up that she didn't want me at her party even though I'd been the one to pay for it and organize the whole thing with Sarah. She said it was a family thing and that just about broke me. At that moment, I felt like an outsider. My wife was sympathetic, but she was in a tough position too, so I didn't want to make things harder for her by pushing my feelings. Still, it was obvious to me that Emma wanted to draw this line in the sand, one that left me on the outside. Over the years, I tried to connect with her in ways I thought she'd appreciate. I'd take her to her favorite restaurants and support her hobbies even when it meant driving her to dance rehearsals an hour away or sitting through recitals. I was always there doing the dad thing. And every time, it felt like she was waiting for me to mess up, almost like she was looking for reasons to prove to herself that I wasn't worth her respect or love. But the resentment? It went beyond just a cold shoulder or sarcastic comments. She'd throw out lines that felt more calculated to hurt, almost as if she knew exactly how to cut me down. "You're just trying too hard," she'd say, or "My real dad wouldn't have made me do that." The worst was when she would say, "I don't need you here. I wish it was just me and mom." It was clear she wanted me out of the picture. And no matter how much I showed up or tried to do right by her, she didn't want it. And the more I tried, the worse it seemed to get. At one point, I tried suggesting family counseling, but she laughed it off and told me, "I don't need therapy to deal with you. You need therapy to understand that you're not my dad." That one hurt, not gonna lie. Things took a real nosedive a few years ago when I found out my wife was having an affair. I'll be honest, it was like someone ripped the rug out from under me. I had no idea. I thought we were doing okay, or at least getting by, but it turned out that for God knows how long, she'd been seeing this other guy, and the worst part, Emma knew about it. Not only knew but supported it. I still remember the day I confronted Sarah about the whole thing. It was a mess of anger and heartbreak. We tried to have a private conversation, but things got loud. That's when Emma came in and started defending her mom. She was in her late teens at the time, old enough to know what was happening, and she didn't even hesitate to side with her. She went on about how maybe her mom had found someone who made her happy and how real love was more important than just sticking to a marriage out of obligation. The way she said it, you'd think I was some monster keeping Sarah trapped. Emma had clearly made up her mind that this other guy, let's call him Mark, was going to be a much better father figure. She was going on and on about how Mark was cool, how he got her in ways I never did. To her, this was a win. Here was a chance for her mom to be with someone she thought would finally make our family feel right, as if I was the one holding everyone back all these years. She even hinted that maybe it was my fault, Sarah strayed, saying things like, maybe if you were a better husband, she wouldn't have to look elsewhere. It was surreal to hear that from the kid I'd raised. All those years I'd spent supporting her, showing up for her, doing my best to be a dad, none of it seemed to matter. I was suddenly the bad guy in my own home, the villain who was somehow to blame for Sarah's choices. And Emma? She didn't hesitate to rub it in. I'll admit, I tried to make it work with Sarah. Call me naive or desperate, but I didn't want to tear the family apart. We went to counseling, had long talks and tried to patch things up, but it was very clear Sarah's heart was somewhere else. And Emma made it even harder, going out of her way to let me know she thought I was the problem. She'd talk about how great Mark was even in front of me, like she was just waiting for me to get the hint and step aside. She'd say things like, Mark really knows how to have fun, or it'd be nice to have someone around who actually listens. It felt like a 1,000 little daggers, each one more intentional than the last. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I was drained emotionally, mentally, you name it. Trying to hold on to a marriage with a wife who didn't want me and a stepdaughter who thought I was the enemy, it was too much. I finally decided to leave the house, and while it was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, it was also the only way I could keep my sanity. I needed to get out, not just for my sake, but so I could actually breathe again without feeling like I was suffocating in my own home. Fast forward a few years and things didn't exactly turn out the way Emma or her mom probably envisioned. After I left, they ended up moving in with Mark. At first, they acted like it was some dream life. Emma would post on social media about how happy they were, how blessed she was to have a real family now, as if I'd never been part of it. I mostly ignored it, but it stung a little. I wasn't surprised though. I figured she'd want to paint the situation in the best light possible, especially since they seemed to think I was the big villain in all of this. But reality has a funny way of catching up. Turns out Mark wasn't exactly the knight in shining armor Emma thought he'd be. For one, he wasn't financially stable, and that fun guy she idolized quickly started to seem less cool and more irresponsible. He had a habit of changing jobs every few months, and when he did work, he was always blowing money on things they didn't need. Emma went from being the daddy's girl in her eyes to suddenly realizing that Mark wasn't all he was cracked up to be. I heard bits and pieces about their situation from mutual friends and people in town. Word was that money was tight and they were barely scraping by. Emma was working a retail job just to make ends meet, and I don't think she expected that. She'd always had things handed to her from me, from her mom, and even from her biological dad on the rare occasions he'd show up with gifts or money. I'm sure she thought Mark would keep the lifestyle going, but he wasn't doing that. And now, she was having to deal with the reality where she was financially contributing to their household. Emotionally, I think she was feeling the strain too. She'd lost touch with a lot of friends, probably because they didn't want to deal with the family drama or because she kept pushing people away like she'd done with me. I also heard that her relationship with her mom was on the rocks. Sarah had become a bit more distant, maybe due to her own regrets or the strain of trying to hold things together with Mark. Emma wasn't getting the same attention or support from Sarah anymore, and I guess she was realizing that family life with Mark wasn't the picture-perfect setup she'd once defended. Then there's the biological dad, Dave. He's still nowhere to be found. No surprise there. He's always been the guy who shows up when it's convenient for him, but when things get tough he disappears. So Emma was stuck. She had no real father figure, no stable family life, and now she was dealing with the reality of being a young adult trying to get by in a home where things weren't exactly working out the way she planned. She's facing financial problems, emotional challenges, and a family situation that's falling apart faster than she could have imagined. To top it off, Mark has apparently started treating her more like a nuisance than a daughter. I'm not sure if he's just tired of the family dynamic or if he has never really wanted to step up in the first place, but I can tell she's feeling the brunt of it. She's even reached out to a couple of mutual friends, almost fishing for sympathy, talking about how hard things have gotten and how she's had to grow up fast. It's ironic because when I was there, I was the one trying to prepare her for the real world and she wanted no part of it. Now she's facing it head on, and from what I hear it's hitting her hard. So imagine my surprise when I get a text from Emma out of the blue asking to meet up. At first, I thought maybe she'd hit rock bottom and needed advice, or maybe it was some emergency where she had no one else to turn to. We hadn't spoken much since I'd left, only exchanged a few polite texts on the holidays, and even those felt forced. But she asked if I could meet her for coffee, and out of curiosity and maybe a bit of that dad guilt that never fully goes away, I agreed. I showed up at the coffee shop feeling kind of nervous but also curious about what was so urgent. She came in looking a little frazzled, not like the confident kid who had once looked me in the eye and told me I was trying too hard as a dad. She seemed more unsure, maybe even a bit vulnerable, which wasn't something I was used to seeing from her. We sat down, and after some awkward small talk she got straight to the point. She started with, "I know things didn't end well between us, and I know I made things hard." Understatement of a year, but I didn't say anything. She kept going, saying how she realized that I'd always been the one constant in her life and I'd been there for her when her bio dad wasn't, and that maybe she didn't see it back then, but she understood now. And then she said it. She wanted me to adopt her. She said she realized she needed someone in her life she could count on and that she wanted it to be official. She went on about how she knew I'd been the one providing for her, taking care of her, supporting her all those years even when she didn't appreciate it. She kept talking about how she'd always thought things would work out differently with Mark and Dave, but that it became clear they weren't going to step up for her the way I had. I won't lie, hearing her say all this felt surreal. It was like all those years of me trying to be a dad to her were finally being acknowledged. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this was all too convenient. She's in a tough spot and needs support. And now suddenly, I'm the person she wants as her official dad. I asked her why now, why she wanted to make it legal all of a sudden, and she started to get emotional, telling me how she needed a stable family, someone who would actually be there for her. She even admitted that she regretted pushing me away, that she'd been wrong about Mark and her bio dad. Part of me wanted to give in right then and there, to say yes and welcome her back with open arms. But then I remembered all the times she said she didn't need me, the years of being pushed aside, ignored, or made to feel like I wasn't good enough. She kept trying to explain, saying she felt she'd been lost back then, that she didn't understand what I'd been doing for her. She even apologized, which was shocking because I honestly never thought I'd hear her say those words. She said she was messed up from all the family drama and blamed herself for putting up walls, but the way she framed it still felt off. It was as if she was glossing over the fact that she'd made my life hell at times. It almost sounded like she was asking for a do-over without fully understanding the damage that had been done. I could see she was genuinely struggling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more about what I could offer her now that she was in a tight spot, and the idea of adopting her just because things weren't going well with Mark. It didn't sit right with me. She was asking me to make a huge emotional commitment to her, to officially claim her as my own. But was it because she saw me as her dad or because she saw me as her fallback? As she sat there, I could see the desperation in her eyes, and I did feel for her, but I was torn. This wasn't just some sorry, let's move on situation. This was years of pain, rejection, and betrayal on both sides. I told her I'd think about it, but honestly, I wasn't sure if I could go through with it. After our conversation, I spent the next few days feeling like my mind was doing backflips. I kept replaying everything she'd said, how she regretted treating me the way she had, how she saw things clearly now and wanted me to adopt her, how she realized I was the only real father she'd ever had. Part of me, I'll admit, was tempted. I'd wanted to hear her say those words for so long, and some part of me wanted to believe that this was finally her acknowledging everything I'd done for her. But I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut that this sudden change of heart wasn't exactly genuine. I couldn't shake the thought that this was more about convenience than love, more about security than a true bond. When she looked me in the eyes and asked for me to adopt her, all I could think of were the years I'd spent being treated like an outsider and the countless times she made it clear I wasn't real family to her. And now out of the blue, I was supposed to drop all of that and to be her official dad just like that? I'd worked hard to rebuild my life after leaving, and I didn't think I could throw all that aside just because things were finally hard for her. So I made the decision to refuse. I told her as gently as I could that I didn't think adopting her would be the right thing for either of us. I explained that as much as I'd always wanted to be there for her, adopting her now didn't feel genuine. I told her that I needed to draw a line for myself, for my own peace of mind, and to respect the boundaries I'd had to set after everything that went down. I didn't want to be a backup plan or the second-choice dad she came to only when things got rough. I needed her to understand that being a father isn't something you fall back on when it's convenient. The look on her face after I said all this, it was intense. I could see the disappointment, maybe even anger. She tried to argue, saying that she was ready to make things right, and that this was her way of showing me she'd changed. She even got a little teary, telling me how hard things had been for her and how much she missed having someone she could depend on. For a moment, I felt like the bad guy, like maybe I was being too harsh, but I reminded myself why I was doing this. Boundaries, self-respect. I needed those things now more than ever. I won't lie, it hurt. I spent years wishing for her to see me as a father, and here she was offering me that. And I was the one walking away, but I couldn't ignore the damage that had been done. I told her that I'd always be there for her if she genuinely needed help, but that I couldn't be the official dad she wanted now. I said I wasn't doing this to hurt her but because I needed to respect myself enough to set boundaries. Adopting her wouldn't fix the years of pain and it wouldn't erase the way she treated me. It felt like the right decision even if it wasn't the easy one. After that, she just sat there quiet and kind of defeated. She didn't push any further, but I could tell she was upset, maybe even a little humiliated. She got up and told me she understood, but I could tell she was holding back a lot of emotions. And honestly, so was I. But it also felt like a relief, like I was finally giving myself permission to move forward without waiting for her acceptance or love. And since that day, I've been caught up in this whirlwind of second-guessing and guilt. I thought that making the decision to say no would be the end of this emotional roller coaster. But, honestly, it's been just as tough after the fact. The dad guilt is taking over, and I don't know what to do now. If any of you readers are a dad, they must understand how I am feeling. Did I make a bad decision? I really cared for her as my own daughter. Any suggestions? Update 1. So just a few days after all of this, I got a message from a mutual friend telling me that Mark kicked both Sarah and Emma out of his house. Apparently, the whole perfect family act came crashing down. And the big reveal? Emma had cheated on her boyfriend and Mark found out. Talk about irony. Here was this guy Emma thought was going to be her real dad, and the moment things got rocky he couldn't handle it. Guess that fun guy she put on a pedestal wasn't as loyal or fatherly as she expected when things got tough. Now they're both crashing at Sarah's cousin's place. They don't really have anywhere to go at this point, so I guess the tables have fully turned. Sarah's cousin's place isn't exactly spacious, so it's just a temporary solution for them while they try to figure out what to do next. And just when I thought I'd heard the last of it, Emma calls me again. She says she needs a place to stay and asks if she could move in with me. She starts talking about how she's been going through a rough time, that she just needs some stability right now and that I'm the only person she feels like she can reach out to. She kept saying things like "you were always there for me," which would have hit differently a few years back, but by now I've put 2 and 2 together. She only reached out to me about the adoption because she knew this was coming. She knew things were going downhill with Mark and she probably sensed that she'd end up needing someone to fall back on. I think she was trying to line up her safety net in advance. I told her no and hung up the phone. It's sad, honestly. I wish she could see that a real relationship, especially with family, isn't about who's there when you're desperate. It's about showing up for each other even when things are good and appreciating those relationships consistently, not just when it suits you. And while part of me feels for her, I can't ignore the reality that she's only back because she's out of options, not because she genuinely wants to rebuild our relationship. Update 2. Hi, everyone. I know it's only been a week since my last post, but I have some updates that I need to share. So even though I told Emma no about moving in, she ended up showing up at my door practically begging me to let her stay. Honestly, I didn't know how to handle it. I asked her why she wasn't staying with her mom and she dropped the bomb that her mom had kicked her out too. I was shocked. This whole situation was unraveling quickly and it felt like I was living in a soap opera. It was late at night and I knew she was just a young girl lost and scared, so I felt a tiny bit of compassion creeping in. I told her she could spend the night, but she had to leave first thing in the morning. I figured that would give her a place to crash for one night, but I still stood firm on my boundaries. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of breakfast wafting through the house. I could hear her moving around in the kitchen, which was a bit surreal. After everything we'd been through, seeing her in my space trying to make breakfast like we were some kind of happy family felt strange. I didn't want to get drawn into some sort of domestic bliss fantasy, so I just grabbed an apple from the fridge and told her she had to leave in an hour. I felt bad, but I had to stick to my guns. Emma tried to beg and plead with me, but I could feel my patience waning, so I told her I needed some space and retreated back into my room. I kept replaying the situation in my head. Was I being too harsh? Should I have at least let her stay a few days? But I knew the answer. I didn't want to enable her to think that she could just bounce back into my life when things got tough for her. When I finally came down later to check on her, she was gone. I noticed her stuff was missing too. Everything she'd brought over had disappeared. I thought maybe she just stepped out for a moment, but when I looked around, I realized she'd packed up and left without saying goodbye. I wasn't sure how to feel about it at first, but I was feeling relieved. I didn't need this right now. I was moving on with my life. Update 3. Hey, everyone. First off, thank you so much for all your comments and support. It's been a wild ride and I really appreciate everyone who took the time to share their thoughts and experiences. While there are no huge updates, I did manage to dig up some more information about what happened with Emma and Sarah. So it turns out that Emma found a friend to live with. I'm really relieved to hear that she's not completely out on the streets and is working to make ends meet. Apparently, her new living situation has helped her get back on her feet a bit, which is great news. I always hoped she would find a supportive environment even if it wasn't with me. As for Sarah, she's still at her cousin's place. I'm glad they have each other during this tough time. It seems like they're leaning on their friends and family to figure things out, which is a positive step. I heard from a mutual friend that Dave ended up helping her out a little. From what I gathered, he was able to give her some financial support and even helped her find a part-time job nearby. I just hope that she's making better choices this time around than surrounding herself with people who genuinely care about her well-being. All of this news has stirred up a lot of emotions for me. On one hand, I'm relieved that Emma is getting the help she needs. It's hard not to feel some sense of responsibility for her. Even though I know I'm not her savior, I've come to realize that my role in her life has changed dramatically.